Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. We are your hosts, Eric Isaacson and Leon Revel.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about with a gentleman who is very familiar with our podcast, used to be a panelist on here, Mr. Tyler McGinnis. But first, we're going to go into This Week in the Web in 5 minutes or less with Leon Revel. Go ahead, Leon.
Thank you, Eric. So first of all, there's a new Stencil release. That's version 0.16.0. It's got a host of new features, performance improvements, and bug fixes. So go and check that out to find out everything that's in that particular release. Private class fields for JavaScript classes is now in development in Chromium, which is quite exciting, although it's quite contentious. I think a lot of people don't actually like the syntax, but let's see how that goes. A new security release for Node has been released. That's 11.3. That's been published now, so take a look out for that and find out what's in that particular release. And there's a list of recommended JavaScript talks being published on GitHub. There's some great talks in there, and they're all split out by year. So go and take a look and see what you can learn from those awesome talks. And that's everything from me for This Week in Web. Thank you, Eric.
All right. That's quite a lot of stuff for this week. So, Tyler McGinnis, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in the past few years. We haven't had you on the podcast in a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. So let's see. Last time I was on, I think it was like 2015. Since then, I have pretty much been almost entirely focused on React education. So I do a lot of teaching, blog posts, courses, kind of the whole gamut, mostly centered on React.js, and also a little bit of just like vanilla JavaScript stuff. So that's kind of what I do day to day, is just basically my entire focus is on creating the highest quality like educational tutorials that I can, and hoping if I do that, everything else will work out. So far, so good. So that's what I do.
So how did you kind of get into doing that, like full time by the sounds of it?
Yeah, good question. So I initially, and this is actually an interesting story. I'll go into it. So I was working at a company here in Utah, just as like a developer, and I spoke at a meetup. And then from there, I met John Lindquist, who is one of the founders of Egghead. And he was basically like, hey, I really like the meetup talk. Do you want to do Egghead stuff? And I was like, that's fantastic. At the time as well, or basically around that same time, I started working full-time at a place called Dev Mountain, which was a boot camp, like a developer boot camp here in Utah. I was their first full-time hire and kind of built out the curriculum for them. So that's when I really discovered that I enjoy like technical education stuff. So started doing Egghead stuff, started doing Dev Mountain stuff, really enjoyed it. From there, really enjoyed doing things on my own as well. Egghead was great, but I kind of wanted a little bit more freedom about how I could approach teaching. So started doing my own thing, and then luckily that has worked out. So I made the switch going full time, I think like 2 years ago now, just by myself. And yeah, now I'm here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I've been listening, I listen to a lot of podcasts in general, and you've been on a few, but also it's interesting to hear. I listen to some people and you get mentioned in a lot of podcasts.
Yeah,
You'll be like, oh, this thing that Tyler helped us with. Oh, and he helped this project also, and he built this, and it's really interesting. Like even interviewing people, I say, well, how do you keep your finger on the pulse? And there's a lot of different answers, but your name does come up quite a bit.
That's good.
And so I was looking into that, and I was like, okay, so why? I mean, he's not that good, what can we do? But seriously, it was because I think what it is not only are you really good at what you do, but you're also an extremely good teacher. You know how to convey information succinctly and in a very consumable format. So how do you balance those skills?
Yeah. Thank you for the compliment first. What I tried, and kind of as I mentioned earlier, my entire focus, like since I've started, I haven't really done any like paid marketing. That's kind of what, whenever I talk to like business people uh, and tell them I've gotten this far just pretty much by like word of mouth, uh, it kind of blows their mind because not a lot of people take that approach, right? But going into it, like I said, the main focus was always like, all right, I want to uh, pretty much just create the resources that I wish existed when I first got started. That's kind of like the whole premise of what I do. Um, and on doing that, if you take that approach and combine it with the idea of like just spending an uncomfortable amount of time on something, right? Like all my blog posts take me, even like my courses will take me like 4 or 5 months to make. It's just like a stupid amount of time it takes me to make that. But when I put in that much time, uh, the product that comes out of it tends to be really high quality. And then from there, you get people kind of recommending you. So it's been a really nice, like organic approach because I don't have to like worry about selling to people, which is just like my worst nightmare. I don't have to worry about like SEO or any of those things that like you typically worry about when you're in sales because it just kind of happens organically because I just try to make the best quality stuff I can. As far as the question of like, how do I think the original question was like, how do I go about teaching effectively? I think with that, one thing not a lot of people talk about. So I served a Mormon mission for 2 years. And if you look at a lot of the really good educators in the JavaScript space, Kelsey Dodds, Ryan Florence, Michael Jackson, Brian Holt, there's a weird commonality of people who are successful at teaching and those who serve Mormon missions. And not to get spiritual or anything, but I think what happens is when you're on a mission, it's basically your job for 2 years to like teach people about Jesus, right? A lot of the times people don't really care to listen to you, which is completely fair. But I think you just get really good at communicating effectively, and kind of the medium or the thing that you're communicating is really just like an implementation detail. When I was 19 and 21, it was about like religion, and now it's about React and JavaScript, right? Which some would argue is like a little religious as well. Exactly, yeah. But yeah, I credit a lot of my effectiveness in teaching to the 2 years that I had to like learn how to teach people about like the Bible essentially. And so yeah, I don't really have any like specific tips other than like go on a mission, I guess, even though I think there's better, more effective approaches to learn to teach. But that's what's worked out for me. So
how do you decide kind of what you're going to teach next? Like, yeah.
So I try to be, and this probably goes back to what Eric mentioned. I try to be like incredibly involved in the community. Like I think of part of my job as like, if I can stay up to date with everything and then inform people what they should stay up to date with everything, or inform people what they should do, that takes a lot of burden off of other people as well. So really, the answer is just like be incredibly involved. Always like it's stupid how much I'm involved because like I hate it sometimes because I just don't want to like do like deep work stuff. But yeah, Twitter's great, Reddit's great. And you can, when you're that involved, you can kind of get a pretty good pulse. Now there is the danger of like being in an echo chamber, and I don't really have a good answer to like solve that. But I think for me, it's always just been be really active on Twitter, be really active on like the technology subreddits, see what people are talking about, see what like libraries and frameworks are trending, and even like see what framework authors are talking about, like interact with them. I think what's great about Twitter is you could literally tweet at like anybody, and for the most part, especially in our community, they'll respond to you, right? As long as it's like a pretty good question. So I think just following the right people and staying in tune with like the community and what everyone's talking about uh, comes pretty naturally, like what's trending and what to talk about, what to teach.
Yeah, the echo chamber problem, and also like there's a lot of people who just hear some buzzwords in the tech community, and because there's a lot of videos on it or there's a lot of content on it, that's like, you know, something that, oh well, if you're not doing this, then you're not doing it right. Like how do you deal with like different like trends? For instance, like we don't have to build out all these polyfills for Internet Explorer 6 or 7 anymore because,
Yep.
you know, I mean, at least in the wealthy Western web, we don't have to deal with a lot of those types of browsers anymore. So that's changed. You know, we don't have to build tables out. But then if you're building emails, yeah, you still have to know table design for HTML and things like that. So, I mean, how do you kind of deal with the right solution for the right problem and teaching that versus like teaching what's hot?
Yeah, a lot of it is honestly what's interesting to me. What I found is that, and I think this is applicable anywhere,
Yes, absolutely.
is if I'm like you can go a long way with enthusiasm. I think that's like one of the keys to success is just like maintain enthusiasm. Um, so with that, like the things that I teach are the things that I'm excited about, because if it was the other way around, if I was writing some like course about how to do email templates, right, I would never complete the course because it's just not exciting to me at all. Um, or the opposite end of that,
That's
like
fair.
if I'm doing something about GraphQL or React or anything that I find really interesting, that's kind of what guides me. And I've been lucky in that the things that I'm passionate about are the things that a lot of people are passionate about. And I think there's like reasons for that. Um, but yeah, I'm very much guided by my enthusiasm. Um, and that's really what like that's really like the key motivator in what I do, because if I'm enthusiastic about something, I know that I can really do anything. It's just like I need to maintain that enthusiasm until the project is done. I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble is it's like they're enthusiastic about something, they start it, and then they lose enthusiasm, they drop it. So I think the key, at least for me, has always been like enthusiasm to get you going, maintain the enthusiasm as long as possible. And then that's when the discipline kicks in, ship it, and then you're done. And then essentially just repeat that cycle over and over until like you die or something.
I think that's a big problem is for a lot certainly for me, and I know for a lot of other people, you know, you kind of see this new interesting technology come out, and you're like, oh, it's, you know, you get really stoked about it, really enthusiastic, and this is brilliant, and you start playing around it, those are the kind of things. You have all these great grand plans for using that particular technology, and then you kind of start to you know, get less enthusiastic, and then it kind of like fizzles out a bit. So, have you got any tips for anybody learning something? How to maintain the level of enthusiasm for as long as possible, and then when it finally runs out, how do you kind of keep going?
Yeah, I think
Without
the biggest,
burning out.
yeah, that's
Yes,
the
of
key.
course.
That's the key. I think a lot of the times I think it's important to remember that like 90% of developers really just want to like go to work, 5 o'clock, come home, play with their kids. Like that's the normal. And all of us are like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not normal. Because like you're listening to this probably not at work, which is weird. That's fine. That's great. I do it. I get it. But that's like weird, right? So I think the biggest thing is like if you're one of
That's
those
awesome.
people, if you're one of those people who like just wants to like you're gonna learn React when like literally that's what you're getting paid to do, like that's completely fine. So this answer is really for like the 10% of us who are just like the weird people who like will go and on the weekends, you know, they'll dig into like some like alpha thing that's just gonna like be a huge pain because there's no documentation, right? Um,
Yeah.
as far to answer the specific question, it was like, how do you maintain enthusiasm as quickly as possible or as long as possible? I don't know if I have a really good answer for that. Basically, what I do, Eric does. I'll call on you a second. Basically, what I do is, and again, this probably is terrible advice, where I put myself in a position where if I don't maintain enthusiasm, I fail, right? So a lot of times that's whether it's like a course launch date. Basically, I just like get a bunch of pressure put on me, uh, and what's the specific law? It's like Parkinson's law, where it's like the time you allocate to something is the time it'll take to complete. Like that rules my life, and it causes uh, probably a lot of stress, and it's probably taking years off my life. But I'm super effective in doing that. Eric, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's definitely part of it. I think for me too, though, um, like I work in a place where everyone is React is the only thing,
Yeah.
and we're using React, period.
Mhm.
And I think React has its merits. I think it's great. Um, I think where it falls down is in other areas with Redux and other things, in my opinion.
Yep.
But you know, we use GraphQL and other things, but you know, I'm very passionate about web components. So I continue being passionate about it. I continue pushing it, but for the things that it's good at, right? Not for what React is good at.
Yeah.
And I maintain that enthusiasm. And I think other people are just starting now to get like, oh, wow, you know, these are really good things. Let's start doing it. I think it's contagious. I think that's one thing.
That's a
That
good
if
point.
you're enthusiastic about something, people are like, oh, look at that. He's really enjoying it, or she's really enjoying doing that.
Mhm.
Let's go do that. And the other thing is, for me, small victories. So like for me, I don't stay motivated to continue if I don't have these little tiny victories. And also maintaining that balance at home. Like if I'm taking away time from my wife and my children, I want to make sure that that's time well spent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that I don't take, it's so easy to get lost in work, especially if you are enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
So to balance that time too, and be perseverant, like keep going. If it's something you really love, you shouldn't stop. And I haven't. Like I really enjoy it, and I don't smash React. I work with it every day, and I'm like, I make some complaints and things here and there, but it's mostly like a love-hate relationship with any technology because it's good at something and bad at another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just trade-offs.
Just my 2 cents. Sorry.
I agree.
So people like yourself who, write really good content, create great tutorials and other online kind of training materials, often become like, leaders in the community for those particular technologies that they kind of write about. So kind of why is that a good thing? And like, why should other people get more involved in doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a good like people always look at me like I'm like super smart and like an incredible developer. Like there are so many people who are a way better developer than I am. I'm just a better communicator than all of them, probably, right? That's what I do. Um, so like I think I'm a better teacher than most people. I think I'm a worse developer than most people. Uh,
I think
and
most developers feel that they're not as good. There's all that imposter syndrome.
yeah, yeah, and I think like it keeps me humble. And so I don't necessarily know if it's a good thing that we like idolize people who write blog posts. But the other part of your question was why is it a good thing? I think for me there has been no more effective like networking tool or really anything than just like writing blog posts. And that was even long before I like started like making courses or anything. Like I started out just like blogging. Um, that got me to really know people because like I'd go to meetup, they're like, "Hey, you wrote that one blog. Like I really enjoyed that. Thank you." It kind of just gets your name out there, and that's really like I mean the key to like if you can uh, approach networking as like the goal for me and throughout my entire career is just to be like incredibly genuine, as you've probably like seeing now. Um, and so a lot of things that people typically do, especially like in sales and marketing, just like feel gross to me. And I think it feels gross to a lot of developers. So if I could network in a way that was like the only thing I was doing was providing someone else value, like that's what I wanted to do. Um, and that's really what a blog post and like blogging does is you're not really asking for anything, but they're going to know who you are just because you're like providing them value. Right. And so as many times as I can get in like the formula of like, I'm giving you something and you're not really giving me anything, unless eventually in the future I need something. Um, I'll take that 10 out of 10 times. And that's kind of what I've tried to do. So that's why I've liked blogging, just because it allows me to it allows me to like get my creative freedom out there or whatever. But also too, it allows me to meet a lot of kind of like implicitly meet a lot of people. Just because blogs can obviously spread pretty far.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
definitely
couldn't.
more persistent than something like social media. I think that's how I stumbled upon Leon.
Yeah, I was
Was
going
he
to
wrote a
say.
blog post?
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. Every opportunity, every good opportunity I've had is come directly from blogging. And as Eric was saying, like I wouldn't be on this podcast if Eric hadn't had written. So I read something I wrote about web components, and that's how we got talking, and that's how I've ultimately ended up, on here talking to you awesome people. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's such an incredible way to kind of
and it was the
share.
same way with.
Yeah.
Uh, I was just going to say it's the same way with me and John, as I mentioned earlier. I would have never been doing this if it wasn't for John Lindquist, and that would have never happened if I didn't speak at a meetup, right? So it's just like uh, putting yourself out there, even it can full, I think is worth it. Even if you just like it, not even for like career advancement, even because you just like get to meet people, and like you mentioned, Leon, like you wouldn't be here without blogging either. So
And another great reason to kind of engage in this community outreach is, um, you know, learning something enough to be able to teach it to other people means that you learn the thing in such depth that for me it's one of the greatest benefits I find for writing blog posts or writing training courses or whatever. It means that you really get a great understanding of that particular thing you're trying to teach, and that's so rewarding, not only because you're helping loads of people, but because that you really get a chance to really dig deep into a particular technology. And that's another great reason, I think, to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, I used to teach as well years ago, and I remember going and creating curriculum, and I had to create my own curriculum because they would give you these books that were like file open, go into here, and they just teach you like the mechanics of opening up a project and working in it, and they don't teach you like how to work with the tools that you're given, not necessarily just go through the motions. And so I had to write all of this stuff, and it was motivating because I knew I had to be ahead of my students, right? I needed to know more than them. And in turn, they taught me by getting that feedback loop. And it was really a fascinating experience. I really enjoyed it. I hope they did. They might be listening to the podcast going, oh man, he only knew a little bit more than me at the time. What the hell?
No, I think that's honestly fairly common. Like I think teaching something is the most like underrated form of learning something. Cause I feel like you've mentioned, like everyone feels like they have to like master the thing and then they teach it, but it's like the opposite, where it's like, literally every single person, including myself, that is like writing blog posts, like they're not writing about things they already know. They're writing because it helps them learn. And then when you do that, like you mentioned, Leon, like you learn to express yourself very clearly. And if there's something that you don't know, that's going to become very obvious when you're trying to teach it. So that's, I don't know why people don't, even very selfishly, like don't, like even if it's something you never publish, like for me, whenever I try to learn something new, I always like think about how I would teach it, even long before I ever publish anything, just because, like I mentioned, like when you teach something, you very quickly learn the thing, because if you don't, then you obviously can't teach it. So
yeah, I do a lot of artwork on my own. Like I do sculpture and painting. And so I used to also teach some of that. And I found that when I actually did business where I would sell my artwork, it was really a chore. Like I didn't love it. I didn't have that passion for it. And so that made it really difficult for me to make a living at it. I couldn't figure out a business model or some example where I could do that for a living and feel good about it. Like I would be like, oh, I'll just give it away if I made it for someone, or I'll make it for myself and I don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
How have you kind of, because you're an entrepreneur, you're on your own, right?
Yeah.
Doing this now. So like, how did you come up with a strategy without giving away your trade secrets for business models and things like that?
Honestly, I give away most of my stuff. I think what you mentioned a few good points, like money makes things weird pretty much in every aspect, whether it's like open source or like content or whatever. Like money just makes things weird. I haven't really found a good way. Like there are times when I'm like, oh, I have to write this post only because it's the most like financially incentivized thing for me to do. I hate when those times happen and I try to minimize them, but the reality is like it happens. Again, it goes back to like, I try to teach things I'm passionate about. When I do that, the side effect is making money. That's never, or I try to never have that be the main driver. Because then it's like, why don't I can just go get a developer job, make more money. Like if I'm going to be miserable doing something, I might as well just like make, maximize profit. Yeah, exactly. Or like be some like Google, or not Google, but like some developer advocate somewhere, right? Like Amazon or some big company. So for me, it's never, it's always just like teaching what I'm passionate about, teaching what I think a lot of people would find valuable, and putting my own spin on it. Money is kind of just a byproduct of that. Thankfully, it's worked out so far. I don't know if I have any good answers to that. So,
well, I think it's your reputation helps that a lot too, because even on Twitter, if you go back through your conversations with people, like you said, our community is good because we respond back to people. But a lot of times when people respond on Twitter, it's not always as nice.
Yeah.
But whenever you respond to people, and there's several others.
Yeah.
You're just very empathetic and
Sure.
very including of people. So that's something I think that when we teach others, or when I teach others, I try to listen, and I try to be understanding of, well, I don't understand their point of view right now, but why are they saying this? Have you found that that's helped you in your when you go out to people and they recognize you and they're like, oh my God, celebrity.
Yeah, I think toxic people on the internet are super interesting, because I don't know what it is. Like, I'm getting into territory where I'm really like don't know what I'm talking about, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But it seems like people who are toxic, specifically on the internet, they do it, and then you call them out on it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Like, I don't know how many times I've seen that personally. I don't know how many times I've seen it with other people, where like someone will say something super rude, and then you're like, you just have to remind them, like, "Hey, like, I'm a human being. Like, I have a son and a wife and like a mom and a dad." Like, and then once you make that like human connection, even if it's just like responding to them, then they soften up. They're like, okay, like Dan Abramov's, obviously he's like the poster boy of this. Like, whenever anyone says anything rude to Dan, he just like reminds them he's a human, and then immediately the conversation switches, right? So I think, I don't know, I'm sure there's ways to get better at that, like practice stoicism essentially. But yeah, it is something that I've found incredibly helpful. It's also incredibly helpful that my mom reads my Twitter feed like all the time, and so does my dad. So if I ever say anything, like, I had one tweet, I'm not going to mention it. It was kind of edgy. It wasn't mean or anything. It was on the sarcastic side because I didn't agree with this other tweet. And then when I was down at Thanksgiving at my parents' house, my dad was like, "Yeah, I saw that tweet. Like, it was kind of out of character for you." And I was like, it was kind of out of character for me, and I'm sorry. So yeah, that helps too, because I know like my wife also reads my Twitter streams. But yeah, no, empathy is one of the main drivers. I think that's it's just important for being a good human being, right? I think in all aspects of life. Luckily, I'm able to practice it more and practice being good at it, because I'm like a mini public figure in our community, and I publish a lot of content, right? But yeah, what I found, like, I haven't, as long as you're genuine with people, I haven't come across, and I'm a white male, so I get that as well. But I haven't come across a ton of like people being super toxic, because if they are, I try to just like steer the conversation in a more positive direction, and most of the time it works. So
yeah, I hope more people start doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, a really good skill to have in your line of work, I suppose, is to kind of steer those situations into a more positive light that maybe could get a bit kind of, especially on the internet, things get heated very, very quickly. So it's good to have that understanding of how to kind of avoid those situations, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just very briefly back on the kind of business model kind of thing. So a lot of your blog posts and stuff like that, they go out there completely free, I assume. So is that to basically drive people to your paid courses and those kind of things, or kind of how does that work?
Yep, that's exactly what I do. So the way that I structure it, the way that I structure a course is I spend a ton of time planning it out. Like, actually creating the content really doesn't. It takes me a lot of time, but I spend more time on the planning stage of it. So what I do is I plan it all out, and then I get like this really detailed course outline. From there, what I do is I say, okay, it looks like I could take these pieces, and I can make them their own kind of like one-off blog posts. So in the full course itself, it kind of like flows really well, but there are some pieces in there that don't need like precursors and stuff after it to make sense, right? So if I'm writing about like React render props, which is part of the React fundamentals course, I can take that out, make it kind of its own blog post. So it's valuable for the people in the course as well, because it flows throughout the whole course, but it's also valuable just for anyone who wants to read about, render props in React. That's really like stuff that I write is part of a course, because that's what makes me money. So I have to like prioritize that and prioritize my subscribers. But from there, what I've seen is that I could then, take out pieces, and then that's good, basically like lead gen into the courses, because I could say, hey, if you like this post, you're probably going to like this course because this post is just from this course. Same thing with YouTube videos. Like that's really the foundation of my entire business, is focus entirely on making courses. And then from there, take pieces out to publish as one-off blog posts.
That makes a lot of sense. So how did you kind of get started with that? Did you really just start out by writing lots of blog posts and lots of great content and seeing how interested people were on those particular, particular pieces of technology, and then as you described earlier, kind of how you got into this, you started creating like courses to kind of match up with that kind of flow of traffic you were getting into your site initially?
Yeah, so the way that it worked was initially it was a lot less like scientific than I am now. Initially, it was I was doing egghead stuff, like I mentioned. I was like, I really, I feel like not necessarily like outgrowing egghead, but I just teach differently. I was used to like very long form stuff, and they're obviously like bite size. So I created a React Fundamentals course, is what I called it. It was a free course, and that was back in like 2016, I think, in January. From there, it was basically like me just trying to create the best course that I could. I really wasn't thinking about like content marketing or anything fancy. It was just like, here's a good course. It's free. I hope you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, then at least give me feedback so I can like improve on it. That's how it started. And then eventually making more courses, I came to figure out like, hey, why don't I wrote this blog post on my blog, and this part of the course is very similar to the blog post on my blog, right? These should be working in tandem rather than like me just creating one-off things for the blog and one-off things for the courses. And so that's kind of how I came in to do what I do today, which is that flow that I described earlier.
So there's like I've written like 2 blog posts my entire life here.
Nice. How was it?
So one of the things I found was I really spent a lot of time on these, right? And I had like a 3-part one about the user experience of Apple, like in there, like and how it was so annoying. Because one Thanksgiving, I remember I was like, oh my God, I want to punch the screen. And so I wrote about it and I broke it down into pieces. And that was the most attention I got on there. But it was like, a dozen people. So it wasn't like, I thought it was good content, but it wasn't really out there. Like I didn't, share it or anything. How do you go about like, maybe you mentioned it earlier and I didn't hear, but how do you go about, promoting that and getting that user base in? I mean, now it's easy because I would imagine it's easy.
Yeah.
Because you have a user base already built up. How did you start though with that?
So, Paul Graham, YC, like co-founder, he had a really good tweet the other week. He said, and this is getting into the more like business side of things. So if you don't care about this, then just turn off the podcast, but we're going to get into it. So he mentioned that first-time founders focus on product and second-time founders focus on distribution. And that's kind of, as you mentioned, like it really sucks to write a really good blog post and have nobody read it. Initially in the early days, what I did, it wasn't anything like fancy. There are certain like moments in this path where I just like, I can only credit it to luck. The very first blog, like the third blog post I wrote, the longest one that I'd written at the time, was about like Angular services versus factories versus providers. Reading it now, I'm like, oh, this is so bad. But at the time I thought it was great. I posted it to Hacker News, and then like it like blew up on Hacker News. Not blew up. It was on the front page for like 3 hours, which at the time was like, it blew up.
It's like super famous on Hacker News.
Yeah, super famous. So at that moment, I was like, okay, I had made it. At that time was when React was starting to like, people were starting to talk about it. And at the time was when I was like, hey, I should do this like React Week workshop thing. So then the next post after that, I believe, or the next popular one, was I did like a guide to React, which was like a 5-part series. Because at the time, React, it was before Create React App. So you just had like, in order to know React, you had to know ES6 and you had to know like Babel and Webpack. And at the time, those things were like super new. I think Babel was like 5 to 6 at the time. Like it had a different name. So it's like, all right, I'm going to write this guide that basically like breaks all of this down. And so for me, the answer to your question was like, I've never at least initially, now until I got those like distribution channels that I have now, I was more focused on like, okay, what will I enjoy writing? That's always like the main thing. But two, that needs to coincide with what people would enjoy reading, because like if I don't do that, no one's going to read this. So like that's the reality of it when you're first starting out, is you have to pick something that people will want to read, and like something, at least what I did was something like trendy at the time, like getting started with React in 2015. And then from there, you could have like obviously like newsletter subscribers or whatever. That you start to get like a bigger Twitter following, like all those things very slowly start to happen. And then the problem of no one's going to read my stuff kind of goes away, because you kind of get that audience. So initially, I think if I were to give advice to someone starting out, it would be write stuff that you think people, one, write stuff that you're passionate about, so it'll be good, and then two, write stuff that you think people will read, probably something trendy at the time, because again, I'm kind of just repeating myself, is people will read it and say, hey, this guy can write really well, I'm going to follow him just in case he writes something else I'm interested in, and then that kind of snowballs, and then you're good. So
yeah, it's interesting. I do follow a lot of people who blog, and I don't really read everything that they do, but I always am looking at their Twitter feeds to see like what they're writing about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because for you to follow someone doesn't really it doesn't put you out at all. So for the very small chance that they'll write something in the future that you'll enjoy, it's worth that trade-off of having to put up with the other 99 tweets. If you get that one tweet that, at least the blog post they wrote, that's something you really enjoyed, right? That's what's great about Twitter, is like, it's not really invasive to follow most people unless they're tweeting, a bunch of times a day. So yeah, but anyway, yeah, I'm the same way, where it's like, I'll follow people only because I've liked their articles in the past, and maybe in the future they'll write another one that I enjoy. So
yeah, Charles Max Wood, who does Dev Chat TV, and he has a lot of podcasts. JavaScript Jabber is probably the one that most people who listen to this probably know.
Yep.
But one of the things that I really enjoyed about hearing him talk about was the consistency of how he puts stuff out. So in order for your audience to stay, he would say, you have to, if you're going to publish weekly and you say you're publishing weekly for your podcast, publish weekly. If you have blog posts or whatever you're writing, and you say I have this schedule, publish on those. And that consistency brings in more and more people. It's really such a simple concept, but I think a lot of content providers, or not providers, but content creators really don't consider when they're first starting out, and then you have to maintain that base.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is that maintaining. I've actually never had like a set schedule. I just publish a lot of stuff, so it's like it probably feels like a schedule. But I know like Kent C. Dodds has his newsletter every week, like the MPMJ, the Fun Function guy.
Yeah,
obviously
he's really good.
He's probably the poster boy of like having a set schedule every Monday. He has a saying, right? Like, hello, or what's the good Monday morning? I think he starts out every video with. So it's like he's probably the best one as far as like consistently publishing stuff. I probably should do that. What happens with me is like, I'll either have too much content that I can't only do, like if I did once a week, it would take me like I'd be publishing like stuff that I wrote today in like, 16 months. Cause I have just so much stuff that I have available to publish. Or I have too little, and then I'm like to the point where it's Sunday night and I'm trying to write something for Monday. Then it just feels gross. That's probably like a problem everybody has. And I just like am finding excuses to not do it, because I think like that's a very common problem of like trying to create something for your deadline. I should try it.
You could set your own deadline though. You don't have to say every week. You could say every month.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. That's true.
If you have more, it's just a bonus.
That's just a bonus. It's a good point.
Yeah,
Maybe
my wife listens to a lot of YouTubers, and like I started watching some of it, like Shane Dawson.
Yep.
And he's one of the more popular ones on there, and he's really good. He puts out some great content. But when he was starting, he was just pushing out content all the time on a regular basis to get more people. But now he pushes it out when he can, and he gets that quality. Like you were saying before, he spends a lot of time on his stuff now, and he's doing one of the things that he wants to do on YouTube. And I think that's really, really good when you can do that. But to start out, it might be a little daunting. And I think it's some good advice you've given on this episode about that.
Yeah, I agree.
So for branding and marketing, any tips on that? Because I know that's kind of a hard thing for, like you were saying earlier with, the sales type pitches and trying to avoid all that. It's kind of a hard thing, but you want people to recognize your branding. I know your logo is pretty awesome. Got a little doggy on there.
Thank you. The foundation of everything that I do is really just quality, as I mentioned before. Any specific question? I'm trying to think. Give me a scenario of someone, whether it's like someone wanting to sell courses or like write blog posts, and I will try my best to answer specifically to that person if you have anyone in mind. Just because like marketing and branding questions is a really broad thing.
Well, I could do that, or like if you have specific things like why did you end up choosing the logo that you have, the fonts that you chose, the branding of your business.
Yep, you're probably giving me way too much credit. So the logo,
some darts.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're good. The logo was basically like, all right, it's my dog. I have a dog. His name's Leo. He's the best. Cute. And then I was like, I also like hoodies. So let me see if I can have a hoodie on the dog. And then I put the glasses on because it like looked a little bit more nerdy. I think
that's awesome.
I think having like a core thesis for what you want your brand to like feel like the goal for me is always whenever someone comes across a blog post of mine, like with the dog logo, I want them to feel like, okay, this is the thing. I don't need to search any longer because like I know this post is going to answer my question, right? Whether it's about like React Router or this specific use case, like I don't want ever to have someone read a blog post and be like, that I'm confused still. Like that's not quite it. And that was really all I try to do. Is like my younger self. If my younger self were to stumble upon this and they had this question, by the time they're done, would they no longer have that question? That's really the goal. So it's like, I haven't been focused on like any real like branding things, any real, like I mentioned earlier, like SEO things. Like I don't really do like growth hacks. I've probably left quite a bit of money on the table because I don't. But for me, I want someone when they read my blog post, one, to have their questions answered, and to two, not really feel like they're being sold to. Again, it all goes back to just like this like feeling of I want to provide you value, and if you give me something back, that's fantastic. But if you don't, like that's cool too, because like no pressure at all, right? I think if that's like all of the people who have been successful in this space who haven't done it on Udemy because they kind of help you with marketing, like Wes Boss, he's the same way. He just creates really high quality stuff. And on top of that, he's incredibly like charismatic because he's Canadian. He's super happy. He likes barbecue. Like, all these things about Wes because he does such a good job at just being like a normal human. And PMJ,
what about Scott Talinsky?
All of those guys too. Yeah, all of those guys. Him, Kent C. Dodds. Like there's so many people who they're just genuine. And I think in our space, because developers are so cynical because they don't want to be sold to, that's really the only approach. So at least that's what I've done. And I've been successful that way. So.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, their podcast, the Syntax FM, which is Wes Boss and what is it?
Scott, I think.
Yep. Yeah. They're very good. They're really good. One of the things that bothers me, and this is nothing on them as far I understand why they do it, is that they are very selly. Like,
are they? Okay, I've actually never listened to it.
But they really push their courses on there, and I get it. That's how they're going to make money, and they're very high quality too. So
maybe I give I give Wes too much credit for being genuine. I've never listened to the podcast. I know his courses are great, but I've never listened to the podcast. So maybe they are super selly. It's just not something like I don't really. Yeah,
I'm not saying they're really ingenuous. They're
Yeah.
It is a little.
It works out for them. Yeah. Yeah, I feel you. But yeah, in their defense, like it's what brings in. It's what allows them to do the podcast, right? So
I get it. And I still listen, right? So
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's so
have great content.
It's so good that they can they can afford the little bit of drop off they're going to get from being super selly, because the quality is so good. So good for them.
And we're coming up on time now. Leon, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah, just before we finish up, I'd like to ask kind of, so it sounds like that you obviously putting out lots of content there. You're really busy, spending a lot of time working on these really high quality courses. So how do you kind of balance, work and life and making sure that you're not burning out and doing too much? Have you got any tips or anything you do to kind of keep all of that in check?
Yeah, so there's like the normal stuff, exercise, like meditate. What I've found is I kind of live on the extremes, right? So it's like if I'm making a course, I'm working a stupid amount of hours, and that's like kind of where all my focus is. But when I'm not making a course, then I can kind of step back and focus on like other important things in my life, right? So my wife is incredibly understanding of knowing and kind of like helping me when I have a really hard deadline. So she's like the foundation of it. I couldn't do anything that I'm doing without her. So that helps. Pro tip: have a fantastic wife. That'll solve most of your problems. Beyond
Easy
that,
enough,
really,
right?
yeah, right. Beyond that, I don't really have. I think the biggest tips are like just do the thing, just work, right? Like you'll be surprised how much work you can get done if you just like work. Like turn off Twitter, turn off YouTube, right, and just work. And I think like I've even though I'm incredibly busy, I've never in my entire life had a moment where I was like, oh, I wish I had more time, because there's just so much time in the day. You just spend a lot of it watching TV or like doing other things. And if you like that, like that's fine. But for me, it's always just like if I have a lot of stuff to do, just do the stuff. It sounds like a stupid like feedback or advice, but like honestly, that's really all I do. Like if I have a post I have to write, sit down and write the post, and then go from there. So I don't know.
I think you're too logical, bringing us back to our roots.
I know exactly. It's just I just tell you what's worked for me. So it turns out, yeah, if you just do the thing gets done. So I don't know.
Great advice. Cool. This has been super awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us
Absolutely.
about this particular topic. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite podcasts. It has been for years now. I've always said that. So I'm glad it's still going. And congrats on you two for the great podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back. I was out for like several episodes, like a long time, for a year. But
Welcome back.
I missed everyone here.
Mm-hmm.
Great to have you back, Eric. Certainly is.
So this has been episode number 177, Community Outreach with Tyler McGinnis. Thanks again for coming on. If you want to check out Tyler's education courses, you can go to tylermcginnis.com, check those out, read his blog posts. They're really awesome. Yeah, can't say enough. Good stuff. Nice positive attitude. Love it. Keep it going, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all next week or before then.